This is the first session of our three-part aquatic invasive species learning experience. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm Megan Pisley-Shaw, the Education Outreach Coordinator with SLELO Prism. And Adrian, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Adrian. I'm the Aquatic Restoration and Resiliency Coordinator, also with Slelo Prism.
And then we also have Brittany Rogers, our Director, Robert Smith, our Terrestrial Coordinator, and Carolyn Costner, our GIS Analyst, who are on our team. And you can learn more about SLELO Prism on our website at sleloinvasives.org, and also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And this event is one of many events being held across the state as part of New York Invasive Species Awareness Week, or NYSAW, and it's a statewide outreach campaign aimed to raise awareness of invasive species and engage community members to participate in stewardship. And NYSAW kicked off on June 8th and will continue through the 14th, and you can learn more about it on their website. And we have a full program in store for you. We'll begin with a few basics and an overview of our program, and then we'll dive into community science tools and plant ID, and we will, of course, have time for questions. And the St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, SLELO Prism for short, is one of 8 prisms that span the state of New York. Creating a network of partnerships is an integrative approach to invasive species management. And the PRISM network is funded by the Environmental Protection Fund, administered by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and is hosted by various host organizations. SLELO is hosted by the Nature Conservancy, and our region includes the 5 counties of Oneida, Oswego, Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence. And we collaborate with our many partners to protect our lands and waters from the impacts of invasive species. And SLELO Prism, it serves as a regional hub for invasive species information, providing resources through our website, newsletter, and publicly available reports. We also collaborate with partners to engage the community through training events like this and other outreach events to raise awareness. And we support invasive species management by prioritizing the highest threat species and focusing efforts where management is most feasible. We also conduct restoration in areas where we've managed invasives, and much of this work takes place in high value priority conservation areas. So the term invasive species is, often used loosely, but what does it actually mean? So an invasive species is a plant, animal, or microorganism that is not native to an area and it has to cause harm to the environment, economy, or human health in the areas in which they've become introduced to. And it's important to note that not all non-native species are invasive. Some like apples are beneficial, while others like dandelions may be a nuisance to some. Not me, because I love dandelions, but they're not considered to be invasive is what I'm trying to get at. And what makes invasive species more impactful than other species is that their ability to spread quickly and outcompete our native species. And this is because they lack natural predators in the environments that they are introduced to. And many invasive species can reproduce in very large numbers, or they easily adapt to environmental conditions. And invasive species are often introduced through human activity, especially global trade. Aquatic species can hitchhike on ballast water or on watercrafts or be dumped into waterways through unused bait or unwanted aquarium plants or pets. And then once they're established, they can spread very rapidly. And there are a lot of aquatic invasive species, or you'll hear us refer to it as AIS in New York, with over 35 different aquatic invasive species reported in the SLELO region alone. And this is taken from the IMAP invasives data map. So to help us prioritize our efforts, the PRISM network, it utilizes a tiered invasive species system that prioritizes species based on their abundance, distribution, and their potential impact. So the early stage species, also called tier 1 or tier 2, those are species that are not yet known to be in our region or are in low abundance in our region. So prevention, Early detection and rapid response are the best management approaches that we take. And then the tier 2 or tier 3 through 4 species, there are more widespread species and more difficult to eradicate or contain. So local control and containment are the best management strategies. And then there's tier 5 or tier M, and these are species that we need to learn more about. So monitoring is the best approach. And you'll hear us talking about these tiers later on, so I wanted to explain them to you. So time plays a large factor when considering the impacts of an invasive species population. So this invasion curve, it shows that the longer a population is left unnoticed and unmanaged, the larger the population grows, making it harder to manage and to contain. So when we're considering the management of invasive species, preventing their introductions and finding those species early on before their populations grow too large greatly increases our ability to control or even eliminate them. And strengthening early detection efforts is where you can actually play a very key role. So volunteers, you're our eyes on the water, and what you do really matters. The Slilo region spans over 5 counties and includes multiple water bodies and shorelines, and our staff simply can't survey everywhere. So having trained volunteers like you keeping an eye out for invasive species greatly expands our capacity to spot them before they become too widespread to manage. And remember that invasion curve I showed you earlier and how prevention, early detection, rapid response offer the highest return on investment. So the Water Protector program is designed to enhance these efforts by recruiting and training volunteers like you to monitor and report aquatic invasive species in our region. Excuse me. And becoming a water protector can be done in 3 steps. So you've already started or gotten the first step by attending this webinar, and there are 2 in-person sessions that we hope you'll attend. And then next steps are to adopt a water body and visit that water body at least once a year to survey for and report AIS to IMAP invasives and native species to iNaturalists, and we'll train you on how to do that. So to help support our volunteers, we created a special Water Protectors webpage with all the resources you'll need to get started and help you along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video and it'll give you a nice tour. Let me know if you can't hear any sound. This is our Water Protectors resource page, and you can get there by visiting sliloinvasives.org/water. And on this page, it has all the information that you need to be one of our water protectors. If you scroll down, you'll see there are lots of different resources. There's a special Water Protectors toolkit that you can also explore, and some photos from past trainings, along with some recordings from previous years as well, if you want to check those out. And then the biggest component are our priority invasive species for the Water Protectors program. All of them are listed here. You can get general overview information, identification and survey tips, and IMAP invasives species distribution maps, which are really useful when you're trying to determine where you want to survey for any of the listed species. And then if you scroll up, you can get into the Water Protectors dashboard to adopt a water body by clicking on that button. And it opens up an interactive map here. There's some information on either side that you can explore as well, especially as a direct link to record your volunteer time, which is really important. To adopt a water body, you can zoom in and out on the map. Click on one of the water bodies that you want to adopt. Scroll through, fill out all the fields. Also, we have a liability form that you can fill out, that you need to fill out as a water protector. If you have trouble getting the download, I can email you a copy. And then you just hit submit. And then you are one of our official water protectors. So during this next session, I'm going to demonstrate 3 community science tools that you can use to aid early detection efforts. So you should have received an email with instructions on how to set up user accounts and download the apps that I'll be covering. But if you recently registered for the session, you may not have had time to follow those instructions, which is completely fine. There will be opportunities to participate more with these apps at the other sessions in this learning series. But for today, I'm just going to give you a brief overview and feel free to follow along on your mobile devices, or you can just watch. So to begin, IMAP Invasives, it serves as New York's official invasive species database. It is supported through the collaboration among the New York Natural Heritage Program, SUNY ESF, and the DEC. Data is submitted by conservation professionals and volunteers like you. And I just want to emphasize that the data that you submit, it really matters. It helps us to learn where new species populations are emerging so we can give a rapid response to hopefully stop their spread. It helps us to, strategize invasive species management and our control initiatives. And it is effective at tracking treatment so we can see if they're working over time and making sure that our efforts are effective. So IMAP has a free mobile app that lets you report observations quickly and easily, even without Wi-Fi connectivity, which is perfect for making reports while you're out in the field. There's also an online platform where you can report observations and view distribution data and report and view treatments and survey data. And the observations and data reported to IMAP can be viewed by anyone on a public-facing interactive map, which has multiple layers and filtering options to make it easy to find the data that you're looking for. And IMAP can also be used to set up notification alerts for specific invasive species, which is helpful for conservation professionals or, project leaders. So this next video is going to walk you through how to use the IMAP Invasives mobile app. You can download New York IMAP Invasives mobile app for free at the Play Store. Just search for IMAP Invasives, and it's the top one there. Then just hit open or download. And this is what the main interface looks like. As you can see, there's some simple instructions that automatically pop up on the screen. To set it up, you hit the three lines on the top left and go to Preferences. You'll want to select New York as the jurisdiction. And if you haven't set up an IMAP Invasives account yet, you can do that by selecting the Create Account or Reset Password button. And it'll bring you right to the website where you can make a user account. And right here on the top, you can put in email and password and log in. But I already have an account. So we'll just get out of there and we'll go right back to the application. So you'd put your email in for the username and the password that you made with your user account. And then you can hit Retrieve IMAP Lists and it'll refresh your lists. You can select scientific or common or both for the names of the species that you'll put observations in for. And you'll want to customize your species list. Always select a fake species for testing since you're learning. And then if there's other invasive species that you know that you want to search for, you can add them here. It's in alphabetical order and there's hundreds of species to choose from. This will make it so when you make your observations later on, you won't have to go through this extensive list. Everything else you can just leave at the default. And also don't worry about default project or default organization at this time either. And then hit save.
and then your preferences are set up. To make an observation, it's quite simple. You hit observation, and you could take a photo using your camera, or if you've already taken pictures from your library, you can choose photos from there. And the species custom list is blue and checked off. So that means when I select the bar here, none selected, my shorter customized list will pop up. I've selected the fake species, so I'll go ahead and hit that since we're testing. And then under that, you'll see species detected or species not detected. So if you found the species that you're looking for, you'd want to obviously select the species detected. If you looked for something but you didn't find it, you can go ahead and select the species not detected. You may wonder why we care about that, and that's because, for example, with invasive tree pests, there's a lot of trees in our forests and a lot of areas to go searching for them. So by learning where people who have been trained to identify a specific species have searched for it but didn't find it, allows us to, go somewhere else where maybe somebody hasn't gone and looked for that species. So for this testing, we're just going to do species not detected. It'll have your observation date, and then you'll also see a map there. If you're ever using this and you don't see the latitude, longitude, or the map isn't showing up, you'll have to go into your phone preferences and just allow access for the app to access your location on your device. There are special projects that you can join with us, and if you're a part of any of those, you can go ahead and select them here. I have a lot of projects, but you likely won't have any when you're first starting out. You can request to be part of different projects. We have them for hemlock woolly delgid, emerald ash borer, fanwort, and so on and so forth. So if you're wanting to really go out and search for those species, you can join a special project, and it just helps the organizer of the project filter the data on the online database. And don't worry about organization. You could put the time that you search for a species in there, and that helps with tracking volunteer engagement. And you can write any comments that you desire in the comments section down here. Maybe it could be, however many trees you looked at for an invasive insect, or, how many acres you think you checked, or anything that you think is relevant information. And then you just hit save, and then you'll get what I like to call a little card. And then to upload it onto the main database, you have to check the box, hit the 3 lines in the top left, and hit the upload selected option. But we're not going to do that since this was for training purposes only. And if you ever need to edit any of these cards, you just hit the little pencil and it opens the card right back up and you can make your edits. And that's it.
Okay. So we've switched up the way we do our special projects, and now we're just using one special project, our volunteer surveillance network, and I will actually add each of you to that project on the back end myself. But you can also request to be added to any project on IMAP invasives by following these steps. So you go to the nyimapinvasives.org website and you log in. And then once you're in there, you'll see something that looks like this icon here in the top left. And then you click on that and it opens this dialog box up. And then you just click on projects. And then it'll open up another area that looks similar to this. And in the search bar, you can type in the name of any project that you're desiring to be a part of. And the project that I'm going to assign the water protectors to is the SLELO Volunteer Surveillance Network project. And as long as you've made an IMAP Invasives user account, I'll be able to find you by your email or name and add you to that project. And moving forward, once I've added you, when you make your observations, you should see that pop up as an option in the preferences section of the IMAP mobile app, and also when you're making an observation. Okay, so the next community science tool that we want to share with you is iNaturalist, and many of you are probably familiar with it. It's a forum that allows you to share photos of species you encounter with a network of people who can help with identification and who often can, answer your questions about those species. And it can also help you identify species using AI technology. So for the iNaturalist platform, we suggest using it to report native species and then to help you with species identification. I'll explain a little bit more why that in a few moments here. All right, I'm going to hit play.
Okay, so you've installed the iNaturalist app and created an account. Time to get outside and record your first observation.
What?
Here's how to do it. Any living thing, like a plant, animal, or fungus, can be an observation on iNaturalist. Once you find something you'd like to record, just tap Observe and take a photo. You can review your picture, then hit Next if it looks good. To identify it, hit What did you see? If you have an internet connection, iNaturalist will suggest 10 visually similar species and often a common ancestor. You can choose one of those or search for a species name. On this observation details screen, you can add more photos of the same organism or write a note. The date, time, and location have been automatically added. You can also change the geoprivacy of the observation, mark whether it's captive or cultivated, or add it to a project. Once you're finished, just hit Share and your observation will be uploaded for everyone to see and identify. That's it. Keep on exploring and sharing.
Okay. So similar to IMAP invasives, SLILO has a special project that you can join. And these are instructions on how to do that. So on the mobile app, you just click on the menu, and then within that menu area, you will see projects. So then you click on projects. And then you should see an area for like a search bar area, and then you type in SLILO Prism. And then you should see our logo pop up here, and it'll look like the center screen here. You click on that and then select Join the Project. And then when you're making observations, if you have an Android, you have to select the project that you want to add it to. And then I've been told with iPhones, it automatically adds it to the project. So you might have to tinker with that, but just notice that when you're making an observation, this is what the screen looks like when you're doing that. And then down towards the bottom, it'll give you options to add the observations to projects. And then if you're using the desktop version of iNaturalist to join a project, you would log on, go onto their website, and log on. And then on the far right-hand top corner, you'll see projects, and then you just follow the same steps. There'll be a search area. You type in SLILO Prism. You'll see our logo pop up, and then you can click Join the Project, and then you've joined. And so I wanted to share a little bit of information about how data is shared from iNaturalist to IMAP Invasive. So it can be shared, but there's certain criteria that has to be met for it to automatically be shared. So first, your observation, it must be one of the over 600 species. Remember earlier that long list I showed you? It has to be one of those species on the list of IMAP invasives for New York. And then your observation must be confirmed by 66% of those who commented on the observation. And this can take some time to happen. And then in your account settings, you have to select a license type that is specifically allowing and giving permission for your data to be shared. It's called Global Biodiversity Information Facility. You don't really need to memorize that. Just know that you need to give permissions for it. And then to do that, on an Android phone, you click on the 3 lines. So when you're in the IMAP or the iNaturalist app on your phone, you click on the three lines to open the menu page, and then you select in the settings. And then in the settings, you select default license, and then you can choose any of those licenses with the green box, the GBIF box. And then on an iPhone, you can click the three lines on your menu, and then you go to content and display. And then in content and display, there's licensing. And then from there, you can find that GBIF option. And we can help you with this later on too, if anybody's having any problems. I just wanted to make you aware that the data will be shared with IMAP. It has to meet this criteria, and that's another reason why we suggest just using IMAP for the invasive species observation. So it's just more streamlined. Okay, and then the final community science tool we wanted to share with you is Seek, and it uses artificial intelligence to identify organisms. And the observations you make to Seek are private unless you sync your account with iNaturalist, which is an option. Okay, so those are the three community science tools that we wanted to share with you. And again, our recommendations are that you use IMAP invasives to report the invasive species, and then iNaturalist to primarily report native species, and then of course to the SLELO project. And then if you're going to use Seek, just use it as backup identification, and you can sync it with iNaturalist should you want to do that. And then also, when reporting observations to IMAP invasives and other platforms, it's very important that the photos you provide are of high quality, because the photos are what we use on the back end to verify your observations. So anything, blurry or indistinct is really hard for us to tell what it is. This is a very good photo here, clear and distinct. We've even got a little bit of a measurement tool here. So just keep that in mind when you're out there doing your surveys and taking photos. Just try to make sure that we're going to be able to tell what the species is. And now we're going to move into the species ID session that Adrian is going to lead. And I believe, Adrian, you're going to share from your screen. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Megan.
I'm going to pass it on.
All right. How's this looking for everybody? Megan, can you see my screen?
That's good. That's perfect.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, thanks, Megan, for the introduction and kind of what to do if you find a species in the field, if you're out there. And now we're going to be diving into the species ID. So over the next hour or so, we're going to be going over about 20-ish species. So aquatic plants are also called macrophytes or hydrophytes, and they're plants that have adapted to live in the water. So they can be found both in marine and freshwater environments. So this means lakes and rivers, wetlands, estuaries, coastal zones, you name it. All right, so you're probably pretty used to this scene, right? Just kind of this 2D flat surface when you're looking out at a water body. Maybe you're not even looking at the water, maybe you see the mountains in the background. Or maybe like this is your ideal situation, just kind of a very open water environment, if recreation is really important to you, and maybe not a whole lot of plants in the picture in these instances. Um, and growing up being a swimmer, right, if you don't know a whole lot about what aquatic plants are, it's easy to associate them with just being weeds. They can be kind of creepy, right, if you're snorkeling and you feel them like kind of trickling around your legs. But if you don't really know what you're looking at or the value that they play. So it's really important to stress that most of our region's aquatic plants are native and they play really important roles in our ecosystems. So you may be familiar about hearing about mangroves or kelp in marine environments and how important they are. And really aquatic plants are our region's kind of freshwater version of that. They really are underwater forests. So they create kind of this three-dimensional habitat, adding a lot of structural complexity to our systems. So that's really important, not just for the plants, but for all the species that rely on them. So even if you don't care about aquatic plants, but you all are here, so maybe there's some interest, you may be a fisher, or maybe you go out fishing, and fish are really important to you. Or speaking strictly for me, I really love turtles. And we wouldn't have turtles if it wasn't for aquatic plants. But the truth is, aquatic plants can be really hard to study. Plant identification in general takes a lot of practice, and especially so for aquatic plants. And they also just don't always get the same glorification as other ecosystems do. Um, so we're definitely not here to get rid of every aquatic plant that exists, quite the opposite. So they serve a lot of benefits to wildlife and their habitat for a lot of species. And they're also really important food sources. So we're familiar with terrestrial plants like trees and shrubs and grasses, and they're really important for the terrestrial species that we're aware of. And aquatic plants play the same role, just in the aquatic environment. Another thing is they act as a nutrient sink. So emergent and submerged plants take up a large quantities of nutrients from the water and sediment. So this is like carbon and nitrogen, phosphorus. So overall, this improves water quality. Stabilization is also really important. So during the event of extreme weather, or like high and low waters, aquatic plants help with bank stabilization or stabilization of sediment within the aquatic environment. And also, they're just really pretty if you learn to look at them that way. Natural aesthetics, people enjoy the looks of aquatic plants if we know how to look out for them. And one really cool thing that I like to talk about is that aquatic plants are descendants of land plants that recolonized the water. So algae-like organisms eventually adapted to live on land. They evolved into plants. And then some of them were like, no, thanks, I'm going back to the water, and became aquatic plants after being land plants. So this means going back to the sea or going back to our freshwater bodies that we have here in the Sligo region. So this is why many of our aquatic plants still flower. This was a trait that was developed on land, much like the daisies in your backyard, because they still rely on the air pollinators. It's a lot easier to find pollinators in the air than it is underwater. So some of these you're pretty familiar with, like water lilies up in the top left corner. Um, most of us know what a water lily is, but there's many submerged plants that do the same thing that are a little more discreet and maybe we haven't noticed before. So on the right is whitewater crowfoot, which is a super cool species I'll be talking about later today. In the middle here is water stargrass, also creates this like really pretty flower. And to the left is bladderwort, which also flowers. And a really cool thing is this is actually a submersed carnivorous plant. So on the downside, some people express concerns about nuisance species. So often this involves aquatic invasive species, although sometimes there are complaints of, native species that are growing unchecked. But this often involves a species that did not evolve here. They're not native. They're left unchecked and form these really massive monocultures that hinder our native ecosystems as well as recreation. Um, so it's invasive species really are one thing that's changing our systems, both recreationally and ecologically. So to go over some of these ID characteristics, plants have a lot of attributes, and all these attributes can be indicators of what type of plant that you may be looking at. So you may hear some of these terms throughout the presentation, talking about veins, the shapes of the leaves, the arrangement, how the leaves arrange themselves on the stem, as well as some of the edges. And even if you don't get it all in this presentation, it's just something to keep in mind weeks, months, years to come as you're practicing those identification skills. So all these characteristics are clues that you can use to help kind of narrow down your search. And they also have different growth habits. So today I'm going to be breaking it into 3 groups. We have free-floating plants, which means that they're not attached to the bottom by roots or rhizomes. So these plants are typically pretty small and can be floating pretty much anywhere on the surface of the water. And we also have floating leaf plants. Sounds pretty similar, but the difference is these plants are rooted in the sediment. However, like the leaves float to the surface. So they're usually growing in pretty intermediate depths. And finally, we have submersed, which is most of the plants that we're going to be talking about today. And this means that most of their leaves grow underwater. There may be some floating leaves present. However, they're mostly submersed, they're attached to the sediment, and they can be found anywhere from like shallow to deeper zones. So firstly, we're going to be talking about free floating. Once again, they're not attached to the bottom by roots or rhizomes. So this here is European frogbit, or Hydrocharis morsus rennae. And this is a pretty common invasive species within specifically the Scleroprism region. So meaning it's tier 4, it's very widespread. We don't usually conduct management in this instance. And the leaves are pretty thick. They're heart-shaped or cordate, and they're pretty small. They're about 1 to 2 inches wide, and they have a pretty smooth edge and almost like a spongy purplish red underside. And they're known to form these really dense mats on the surface of the water. They also produce flowers, which are not always the best identification strategy since flowers are only present for a part of their growing season. But when the flowers are present, there's 3 white petals with kind of like these yellow centers. And they do have roots. They're like 3 to 8 inches long, and they are dangling from the underside of each of the rosettes and not attached to the sediment. So they're most likely to be found in pretty quiet, slow-moving waters, and they can really form these dense blankets over marshes, the edges of lakes in particular. And it can be misidentified with some native species. Sorry, that is not yellow little floating heart. This is pond lily, which you're probably familiar with. They don't look super similar because pond lilies are usually pretty large in diameter. But here is the native little floating heart, which can be really easily misidentified with the invasive European frogbit. The main way you can tell them apart is by the leaves are a little bit ovate, like more oval shaped, a little bit more like egg shaped, a little longer, and less rounded and less lobed than the European frogbit. They also have flowers that are with 5 petals as opposed to 3. So when neither of these species are flowering, it really takes a double look to see which species we're really looking at here. Also, I do want to point out that the little floating heart is a floating leaf plant, meaning it's not free floating. It is attached to the sediment. And next, I'm going to be talking about some other floating leaf plants, like the native little floating heart, unlike the invasive European frogbit. So floating leaf plants, their roots are attached to the sediment. Here we have the yellow floating heart, which is the invasive version of the little floating heart. The big distinguishing factor is these really showy yellow flowers. So they have these heart-shaped leaves as well that are floating on the surface. Their leaves are about 3 to 12 centimeters in diameter, and a key indicator is they're slightly wavy, kind of giving this scalloped appearance. So they also have the fringed yellow flowers, which have 5 petals, and they grow on stalks like just above the surface of the water. Like I said, flowers are not the best ID feature because they're only visible from like June to September. So this is not to be mistaken with our native pond lilies because this is just much smaller than most lily pads we would come across. So keep in mind those 5 fringed petals and very different from the little floating heart, which tends to be a smaller plant, and native, which has the white petals on the flowers. Next, we have water chestnut. So this is another floating leaf plant, or Trapinetans. Also a pretty common invasive species in Slilo prism. And you may be pretty familiar with our water chestnut hand pole removal events. So this is open to the public, where it's really a good way to put management in the hands of the community, avoids the use of herbicide, and we're able to engage folks and go out in the water and track our efforts over time. So these are floating rosettes that reach about 16 inches in diameter. So they're a pretty large, pretty noticeable plant. And they have these inflated spongy petioles, which the bottom left corner, you can kind of see those, and that helps the plant stay buoyant. And they have these really sharp nutlets that have these 4 pointed edges, and they bury themselves in the sediment. And they stay viable for a really long time, like 10 years. And they're not fun to walk on if you happen to be wading barefoot. So really keeping an eye out for these large triangular floating leaves on these large rosettes, the nutlets, and the spongy petioles. Also known to really impede recreation because they create these really big mats and they overcrowd our native species. So these, we're going to be moving on to the submersed plants, which is really the bulk of the presentation. So most of their leaves grow underwater. There are some leaves that float to the surface. And we're going to be breaking this down into different subsections. There's a lot to break apart here. So we're going to be starting with the opposite or the world leaves. This is something that, once you start practicing ID skills, you'll become quite familiar with. So this is Elodea, or common waterweed, Elodea canadensis, stands for like marshy and from Canada. So pretty slender stems. This is a really important native species that we have. And they have these like small lance-shaped leaves that are like 6 to 17 millimeters long and pretty narrow, like 1 to 5 millimeters wide. And they have no leaf stalk or petiole. They're just directly attached to the stem of the plant. And really notably, what I was talking about with whorls earlier, You can see this cross section here. This is with leaves in whorls of three, kind of like a windmill shape, and they're about like a centimeter-ish long. So these branching stems create kind of these mats on the water that are really beneficial to a lot of our fish species. And there are some flowers that grow on these like long, slender stalks above the surface, but it's really not that common to find. And interesting, most of these plants are female here in the Northeast. There's very few male plants of this species. So I'm going to be talking about how it can kind of be commonly mistaken with some really other really invasive plants I'm going to be talking about. So here is a tier 1 species, meaning it's not here yet in the region. However, it's really of high concern. So it has been present in or detected in the Finger Lakes and some other areas kind of bordering the Sligo region. So hydrilla is known to be like one of the world's worst aquatic invasive plants. It can grow really quickly. So like up to an inch a day and can reach like lengths of 20 to 30 feet. So this is known to invade pretty deep, dark waters where a lot of our native species can't colonize. And so once they grow a lot, they die back and can reduce dissolved oxygen levels, kind of creating these dead zones where some fish cannot survive at that point if the monoculture is big enough. So some like 3 key characteristics to really pay attention for when looking for this species, really keeping an eye out. There's leaves in whorls of 4. So the bottom right picture kind of shows that. 4 or more around the stem. So at least 4, unlike Elodea previously, which only has whorls of 3. And it also has these really visibly serrated edges or kind of like tooth-like structures that can really stand out. If you put your finger against it, you'll feel kind of like those toothed edges. And it also has potato-like tubers. So the bottom picture can kind of show there's those structures, and those are basically like thick underground part of the stem or the rhizome of the plant. So native lookalikes won't have all of these characteristics that I talked about. So side by side, invasive hydrilla, like I said, 4 or more. So at least 4 whorls around the stem, really visibly serrated edges and tubers. Our native Elodea does not have, has like 3 whorls and no serrations and no tubers. Another invasive species as well, tier 1, also not yet in the region that we're on the lookout for, is Brazilian Elodea, Elodea densa. So this has been confirmed in some parts of New York, mostly the southern region. It's not yet in Sligo. So it makes like early detection, rapid response really critical for preventing establishment. It has about 4 whorls and really fine serrations that are only visible under a microscope. So once again, our native species has whorls of 3. This has whorls of like anywhere from 4 to 6. And it's not to be misidentified with hydrilla, even though they're both invasive. This does have serrations on the leaf edge, but they're only visible really through magnification, whereas hydrillas, the edges are very visible. Moving on to another really notable native that we have is the slender naiad or Flexilis. So it's the water nymph, stands for water nymph or flexible. And it's really our most common of our naiad species. We do have multiple in the region, but when doing surveys, this is the one we come across the most. And it has these finely branched stems. So the leaves are often paired, but can have like kind of these clusters around the leaf axils. And they can be really variable in size depending on where you find them growing and what the conditions are there. So the plant can be like pretty compact and bushy, or it can be like really trailing and slender, hence the name. So it really depends. Um, and under magnification, it can be very finely serrated edges too. Sometimes can also have these really tiny flowers that are pretty inconspicuous. And this is not to be misidentified with the brittle naiad, which is also a pretty common invasive species that we have here. Tier 4, so it's pretty widespread in the region. You might come across it a lot. So they're oppositely arranged leaves, about like 2 leaves per node or so. And leaves are not divided, but they're very obviously toothed. So as you can see in the images, those like toothed edges are really standing out. So there's a lot of native naiads that are found in New York, but brittle naiad is really distinguished by these spiked leaf margins that are kind of growing opposite of the stem. Here's another picture. Okay, so starry stonewort is actually not an aquatic plant. It is technically a macroalgae. So it's kind of a bit different. It's the only algae I'll be talking about today. So it can grow really big. It can grow to like 2 or 3 meters in length, forming these really dense colonies on the floor of lakes and rivers. I tend to see them snorkeling a lot. They're not always super visible from the surface, but if you dive deep down, they can form these really dense monocultures and really easily outcompete our native habitats. So there's whorls of like 4 to 6 branchlets with these blunt tips, and each branchlet has one or more short bracts, which makes this kind of like forked or divided appearance. And they have like one of the biggest key ideas, they have these bulbils that are formed in the sediment on these clear threads that are called rhizoids. Um, so there's a lot of native Chara species that are can be mistaken for the starry stonewort, but really this bulbil is a good indication, and they're really tiny. So you have to really be on the lookout for the bulbil. But that's the key ID. And they tend to be very large compared to some of our native Nitella species, forming these pretty large bract-like or like Y-shaped branches. Okay, so maybe you're feeling a bit in the weeds. Y'all are welcome to take a short 5-minute break and we can resume in a few minutes.
Yep.
Good.
Yep. You're good to go.
Okay. Is my screen still shared? There we go.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. All right, welcome back, everybody. There's a lot of information, so it's good to take deep breaths and use the bio break when we need to. So now continuing with submersed plants, we're going to be moving on to alternate or basal leaves. All right, so this means we're going to be covering pondweeds. So identification of pondweed species can be really tricky. Um, however, there's some like key features that we can really look at to help recognize them. So they have all very alternate entire leaves with a noticeable midvein. You'll get to see what that means. So there are a lot of pondweeds in our region. There's like about 35 accepted species, and in addition, they hybridize with each other. And reproduce. So there's can be difficult telling them all apart, and sometimes it takes years of practice. But we're going to be going over four that are pretty common. We come across a lot in our region and are fairly easy once you get the hang of it to be able to identify. So here's the one invasive pondweed that's in our region. The rest of them are native. So this is the curly leaf pondweed, and this is unfortunately tier 4 and very, very common species in our region. So curly leaf pondweed starts its growing season really, really early in the year. So it's like late winter or early spring. So it gets quite an advantage over our native vegetation. And when in full growth, it forms these really dense mats that can impede recreation, reduce waterfront property. So it kicks off early. So this is probably one of the first species you're gonna be seeing out there. So it can grow in pretty shallow or deep waters, typically about 15 feet. And the leaves are about 3 inches long, only about a half an inch wide. And most noticeably, their edges are very wavy, looking kind of like lasagna noodles. The leaves are alternately arranged along the stem, and become denser towards the tops. So most notably is really those curly leaves, hence the name curly leaf pondweed or Potamogeton crispus. And this is our clasping leaf pondweed. So one of our many notable native pondweeds. So this consists of one straight stem with about 2 or 3 branching stems further up, and hence the name clasping leaf. The leaf blade clasps entirely around the stem. The leaves are pretty small, like 1 to 6 centimeters long, 1 to 4 centimeters wide, and they are cordate or heart-shaped. So really there's also some fruit that's noticeable, and that's arranged along the spike, but mostly looking out for the leaf that clasps entirely around the stem. Potamogeton perfoliatus is another name. Also can be kind of misidentified with Richardson's pondweed, which is another native species we have. Pretty like sinuous stems, very similar. The leaves are pretty oval to kind of somewhat lance-shaped as well. They're 3 to 12 centimeters long, so a bit longer. And the biggest key here is the leaves clasp only partially along the stem. So, oh, thanks. Just kidding. So yeah, the leaves are also like typically a bit more elongate, so longer, a little longer than wider than the clasping leaf pondweed. And here is the flatstem pondweed. So one of the best ways to key out the species is by just putting the plant between your fingers and trying to roll it back and forth to check for its flatness. So the flat stem pondweed or Potamogeton zostriformis has that flattened stem, and you'll feel it when you're like rolling it. The leaves are pretty stiff and linear, and really important to pay attention to the prominent midvein. and many fine parallel veins as well, but the central midvein will really stand out the most. So really keeping that species in mind when we're thinking about water stargrass or Heteranthia dubia. This can look very, very similar to the flat stem pondweed. However, this is not a pondweed at all, and it does not have a midvein. So it's slender, has finely branched stems, um, and like also the alternate leaves. But it's just like the key thing to look out for is no central midvein. And when you're lucky, you get to see it in flower, which also differentiates it from its pondweed lookalike. And this is eelgrass or water celery or wild celery, also called Vallisneria americana. This is one of my personal favorite aquatic plants that we're going to be kicking off our aquatic plant restoration pilot project this summer, trying to incorporate these native species into native revegetation efforts following water chestnut poles, because Vallisneria is so versatile, can establish in a lot of different habitats. So they have basal leaves. So they're all growing from the single base. And so their leaves are kind of ribbon-like in clusters and can be pretty long. They can reach up to like 2 meters long. And they have this pretty prominent central stripe and almost a cellophane-like consistency. And the tips of the leaves can also trail along the surface of the water, just creating this really cool habitat feature. So the ribbon leaf pondweed is similar, but I won't be going into that right now. So one cool thing is the female plants produce these long, thin stalks that carry a single white flower to the surface of the water. So what I was talking about earlier is aquatic plants still use this reproductive strategy. So then towards the end of the summer, once the little white flower is at the surface, after it's been pollinated, it will recoil its stalk back underwater. So it's creating this coil underwater that pulls the flower down at that point. This is only the female plants that have evolved this feature. Okay, so water soldier, this is a tier 1 species of really, really high concern. It's a submerged perennial aquatic plant that has these really like long, thin, serrated leaves that grow in a rosette formation. It was discovered in 2008 in Ontario, and it's been under really, really heavy active management to contain that species. And we're definitely have a lookout for this in the St. Lawrence River area. So this is where it was previously detected. And it can form these really dense monocultures. So vegetative reproduction is believed to be like the primary means of spread in North America. There are not flowers that are observed up north. So there's like really no native plants that I can even say this looks anything like. The most similar in appearance is like the aloe plant or like a spider plant, or like the top of a pineapple. So I wouldn't really misidentify with a lot of our natives. It's so like unique in its own way and highly, highly invasive. Um, yeah, so just really having a look out for those like serrated edges as well. Much like an aloe plant, they're almost like sword shaped. pretty bright green in appearance, those like sharp spines. Um, and how it reproduces vegetatively is kind of like circled here and kind of indicates how this plant spreads. So like I mentioned, there's a lot of active management for that species. And it is not in our region yet. So something to be on the lookout for. Okay, so we're still within submersed plants, and we're gonna move on to submersed plants with finely divided leaves. This is coontail, Ceratophyllum demersum. It's a really common native species that we have. It has these like long trailing stems that don't actually have true roots, but they're anchored in the sediment by these like modified leaves. The leaves are pretty stiff, and they're arranged in whorls of 5 to 12 at a single node on the stem. So each leaf is forked once, occasionally twice. And there are these like little teeth along the margins of the plant, like not actual teeth, but creating kind of that sharp, pointy appearance. So they spread mostly vegetatively, um, and yeah, just oh, sorry. So not to be misidentified with Eurasian water milfoil. So this is a species that probably many of you are very familiar with. It's so heavily colonized within our region and across New York, being a tier 4 species. However, it's still being pretty heavily managed. Um, so it can overwinter and overgrow in the spring, much like a couple of our other invasive species. So it blocks out sunlight for a lot of our native plants. So the stems they can be pretty long. They're reaching like usually 3 to 10 feet, but they can reach as long as 33 feet in length, creating these really dense mats on the surface as well. And the leaves are divided with these like 14 to 20 pairs of feathery like leaflets. So it kind of resembles like the bones of a fish spine. Let's see if there's another picture. Yeah. Um, so they're attached to the stem on these whorls of 4. As you see in this cross section, can also be 4 to 5. And an interesting ID feature is the tips of the leaflets look kind of blunt, like somebody kind of snipped them off. You can see on the far left, kind of like that very abrupt edge on the tips. The leaflets, like I said, are pretty feathery. They're very limp when they're out of the water. So they just kind of, the whole plant just flops over. Color is usually not a great ID feature because it can be so variable depending on the conditions. But they tend to have more of a red-ish color compared to some of our native milfoils. This here is Myrophyllum aquaticum. So another milfoil species. They are an invasive that are tier 1, so we don't know them to be in the region yet. Um, they're referred to as parrot feather commonly. Um, the stems can grow like up to 6 feet long, and they also have emergent stems that can stand out almost like a foot above the water, like very erect. So it has both those submerged and emergent kind of feathery leaves that are arranged in whorls of like 4 to 6, as you can see in the cross section in the left-hand corner. So they're pretty stiff, pretty bright chartreuse color in general. The submerged leaves of the plant are a bit darker, can be a bit thinner as well. They also produce these small yellow-green flowers. However, that's not always observed. And unfortunately, because of their pretty like elegant, showy appearance, they have been introduced beyond their native range for through the aquarium trade. So when talking about invasive milfoils, especially the Eurasian milfoil that we've probably heard so much about, I do want to mention that our region is home to several native milfoil species as well. Um, so these our natives are sometimes like overlooked or misidentified. So Eurasian milfoil is most closely kind of resembling our native northern water milfoil, which also has whorls of four. But one of the ways you can tell them apart is count the leaf divisions. And for northern, they have like only 5 to 12 leaflets along that spine versus the Eurasian water milfoil that had a lot, like up to 20 of the leaflets. So like more than 14 for Eurasian. So there's less leaflets on our native species. Um, and when you hold the northern water milfoil out of the water, it will kind of stay upright versus the Eurasian water milfoil that just kind of collapses down. So another slightly less common milfoil is Farewell's milfoil, worth mentioning. It's very slender, very thread-like. The leaves are uniform, very delicate. They're crowded and they're also alternate, as opposed to like the fishbone appearance on the Eurasian milfoil. Their leaflets are usually like divided with like 5 to 8 pairs of slender divisions. Okay. So whitewater crowfoot, another one of my favorites. Not to have favorites, but this is also called Ranunculus trichophilus. And Ranunculus you may have heard of before. It's what we call our buttercups that we are familiar with on terrestrially speaking. Buttercups are also Ranunculus, so same genus. And they have these like long branching stems that emerge from these trailing runners. And the leaves are about like 1 to 2 centimeters long. They're alternately arranged in clusters, kind of like these cluster-like um, arrangements along the stem. And they are finely cut into these thread-like divisions, so sometimes easy to misidentify with some like Eurasian water milfoil. So the leaves are directly attached to the stem. There's no leaf stalk, there's no petiole. The leaves are pretty stiff and alternately arranged, and they do hold their shape when they're lifted out of the water, at least kind of, as you can see on the left. And they do produce flowers, so they have these white flowers with 5 petals. So in our region, the flowers are usually between June and July. So they're pretty frequently flowering aquatic plant. Here's another picture. All right, so fanwort can also kind of be misidentified with the whitewater crowfoot. Um, so this is very recently a tier 2 species. A couple years ago it was discovered for the first time in our region in the Little Salmon River. So we're under super active management to try to contain this species when eradication is still possible. So it's really stands out in the water column once you get an eye for it. It has these fan-like shape leaves that are divided. So they split like almost like the letter Y at their tips. Um, so they have pretty long petioles branching out from the stem, as the circle shows there. So they're all also oppositely arranged. So they're attached to the stem, creating these fan shapes, oppositely arranged. Oh, here's another picture. So like I was mentioning earlier, it was found in the Little Salmon River a couple years ago, and we're really trying to amp up our monitoring efforts along these other tributaries because they are entering the Bay of Lake Ontario, where there's really a high potential for spread of this species. Um, Last but not least is the yellow iris, which is a little bit different than a lot of the plants that I've been talking about because this is a bit more riparian. So it forms these really dense monoculture stands and they spread really quickly by rhizome. So they unfortunately are displacing our really important riparian plants, causing the loss of a lot of valuable habitat in our wetlands and riparian areas. Um, so when it's not flowering, the yellow flag iris can be really confused with our native blue flag iris, which is here. Um, the blue flag iris tends to be a lot smaller. The flowers, the stems as well. So when they're not in flower, it's hard, but otherwise, our native species has a blue flower, hence the name blue flag iris. So when not in flower, the yellow iris, um, the leaves are kind of dark bluish green. They're long and flat. They have a really distinctive midrib that runs along the length of kind of this sword-like leaf. Like I said, the flowers are pretty showy and yellow. And also a good key feature is the rhizomes are kind of these pink fleshy color, like pinkish orange, and really stands out. So we do conduct management for these yellow iris within our priority conservation areas. We go out and we remove them manually to help prevent the spread of the species. Okay, so just want to kind of wrap up and say, like, talk about quickly what it's like to go out and survey. There's a lot of ways to survey aquatic plants. So you can like stay completely dry, or you can swim. You can do a survey by dock or land or boat. We conduct these rake toss surveys where we throw a rake out in the water, we let it hit the ground or the bottom of the water. We pull it in and we look at what species were at the bottom. So not all the species are visible from the surface, so this really helps us get an idea of the composition of plants below the surface, and we track these over time within our priority conservation areas. You can also get out in waders, snorkel, which I love to do in my free time. It's a good way to make use of some boating recreational time. It becomes addicting, at least personally speaking. So also you can use a view scope, underwater cameras, any way that really fits your livelihood. And it can be as casual and incidental as you want, or as formal and survey fancy as you want as well. So what do you do if you find hydrilla or some other tier 1 species that we don't know is present in the region yet, that we're pretty concerned about? Just don't panic. There's a protocol. Just collect as much information as you can. Make sure to document where you are when you found the sample or just where the sample was collected. And take lots of photos. Megan talked about earlier what a good photo looks like versus a bad. It really helps learning these different key ID strategies, maybe that can help take a better photo of things to look out for when trying to ID a plant. You're welcome to take a sample, bag and tag it, as well as call me and report it immediately. I think that wraps up my section, and I will pass it back to Megan.
Okay, so you should be seeing the slide still. The IL species spotlight email slide. So So Adrian, thank you very much, for that very in-depth overview of all the aquatic plants. And we also want to recognize, this is a lot of information. So we thought about some ways that we could help support you, our water protectors. So we've developed a special ISLE species spotlight email series that's going to feature different invasive and native plants and provide an outlet for you to share any questions or experiences that you may have. So these emails will launch bi-weekly on Wednesdays starting tonight, and then go through early September. So keep your eyes on your inbox for those. And before we conclude, I wanted to share some upcoming events for you to consider joining. And a link to our events page will be shared in your follow-up email. So don't worry, you'll be able to get a direct link to them if you're interested in joining. So as you know, there are 2 more sessions for this learning series that we hope you will join us for. There's going to be a workshop on July 10th out at the Indian River Lakes Conservancy Redwood Preserve in Redwood, New York. And it's just a great opportunity for you to get up and close and personal with the plants. We'll have a large variety of aquatic, native, and invasive plants for you to check out. And Adrian and I will be there to help explain how to ID them. And then we have a guided paddle, which is a great way to spend time on the water and see the plants in their natural environment. We're going to demonstrate how to conduct a rake toss, and we'll have a few underwater viewing scopes for you to use. And we're still deciding what lake we're going to have that on, which is why we're asking you earlier which lake you would prefer, but it will be one of the Indian River lakes. And then Slelo Prism is hosting our very first Bio Blitz this Saturday out at Lakeview Wildlife Management Area. So if you've never been there, it's absolutely beautiful. It's in Henderson, New York, right along Eastern Lake Ontario. It's just a great opportunity for you to just test your new aquatic plant ID skills if you want, or you can join us for a walk if you don't want to get out in the water. Your choice. And we're going to use iNaturalist to record everything. And we're going to have a bagged lunch on the beach afterwards. So it's a great day if you want to come on out. And then lastly, we're holding a water chestnut pull on the Oswegatchie River on July 17th. And this is a great paddle down the river to manually remove water chestnut. And it's just a great way to give back to our waters by protecting the river from the invasive plants. And we want to conclude with just thanking you. We really greatly appreciate you joining us today and are excited for you to join our wonderful community of volunteers. And I did notice that some folks came on a little bit after I had that poll. So I was just going to end with opening that back up. That way, if you did come on a little bit later and you didn't see this poll, please fill it out. It's going to help us capture attendance. And I also did fix the question. So to make it so the lake, or I thought I did anyway, make it so the lake didn't have to be answered, but now it's looking like it's still required. So I guess it didn't work. So my apologies there. But if you didn't take this once already, go ahead and take it. And then we'll open the floor for questions. Anybody have any questions? We did answer some in the chat that folks were asking, but I don't know if you wanted to elaborate at all on those. Adrian, there were some questions about the difference between an algae and the true plants, and I answered it in the chat saying that the microalgae lack true roots, stems, and leaves and absorb nutrients through their entire surface, and then the true aquatic plants, they have the vascular, specialized roots, stems, and leaves to get their nutrients from.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. That's an awesome response. I don't think I could answer that any better.
And then also somebody asked earlier in iNaturalist, when you're making an observation, it asks you to toggle on or to check mark or to leave blank if the species is captive or cultivated. So I answered that, and the way they have it worded is a little confusing because it says captive or cultivated, but it's only one question and it's a check mark. So I'm taking it as if it wasn't found in an area where like a garden or something like that. If it's in a natural area, like in the forest or in a waterway or something, then you wouldn't check it off. But if it was in like a human maintained space, then
Right.
you would check it. So that's my take
Yeah.
on that. But
Yeah,
I agree, it is a little
exactly.
confusing.
Right. It's an important question to have an answer, because whether this non-native species is growing very well out in the wild or like, outside of its native range without the help of humans, that can be a very different story than something being actively maintained by people, in their garden, as opposed to it like growing just rampantly out, out in our ecosystems.
Okay. And the rest just looks like comments.
Looks like Dannon has a question.
I think they just, well, unless there's another one.
I have a question. It's
Okay.
Dannon.
Oh, hey, Dana.
Hi. So I did mention I made an observation last weekend that we have the yellow iris here in our Erie Canal, which is beautiful, but I knew it. I knew it wasn't supposed to. I could tell just because it was so thick and dense. And
Yeah.
so my question, am I allowed to just walk into the Erie Canal, grab a sample,